Bob Wright. I'm the president of the Civic Association. I want to welcome you to our annual awards luncheon. I thank you very much for being here. The Civic Association is hard at work trying to do everything we can to enhance, improve Palm Beach. All the funds we raise today will help that mission. With the bridge closing, shore protection issues, and others, this is a critical time in our community. The Civic Association is committed to finding solutions, and that to serious problems, and your support is sought after and appreciated in all respects for that. I want to thank Michelle and Howard Kessler. Michelle Kessler for planning our event today, and and I want to thank both Howard and Michelle for completely underwriting our awards dinner at their beautiful home last night. We had a wonderful time. Michelle, we have some flowers for you. Would you please come forward? I want to thank Ned Barnes, our president, Joyce, Rebecca, and Mike at the Civic Association for all the hard work that they do to make these events successful. I want to thank our other members of our planning committee who, along with Michelle Kessler and myself, put this event together: George Cohan, Brian McIver, and Bob Niederlander. Thank you very much. We have some special guests with us today. Palm Beach Mayor Gail Caniglio. Please stand up. Town Council Member Bill Diamond. Bill. Town Council Member Richard Clyde. And I saw Town Council Member Michael Pacillo. And Town Manager Peter Elwell. Thank you, Peter. I especially want to thank our sponsors, Brayman Motors and Kochman and Zisco Law Firm. Both are helping make this event possible for the second straight year. Brayman Motors has been providing South Florida with leading luxury automotive experience for more than 25 years. It's the premier retailer of new and used Audis, Bentleys, BMWs, Minis, Porsches, and Rolls-Royce. That's quite a package of cars. And serving Palm Beach and all of Southern Florida. So I especially want to thank you. Brayman representatives are here today. Vince Cerrone was at our dinner last night. Would you please stand? There we go. Thank you very much. Kochman and Ziska PLC represents high net worth clients in the planning and administration of their wills, trusts, and estates, and in residential real estate purchases, sales, and zoning matters. The firm also handles prenuptial agreements, establishing charitable organizations, Florida intangible tax matters, and change of domicile issues, including related income tax audits. There you go. There's something in there for everyone. Ron Kochman and Maura Ziska are here today with us. Would you please stand up? Thank you. I also want to thank all of our underwriters, table sponsors, and benefactors. I want to thank our underwriters who have put $5,000 in to our underwriting this event. Our table sponsors are $3,000, and our benefactors at $1,000, and our patrons at $500, who have contributed so generously today. Their names are in your program, and I want to thank all of you for coming and supporting our efforts. A round of applause for that group. Thank you. And finally, I want to thank the Breakers and its president, Paul Leone, for helping make this event possible. Paul is a Palm Beach Civic Association director and a friend. Paul, will you please stand and join us for a round of applause? Where is he? Hey, there he is. Joe and Mika will be taking questions after their remarks today. If you have something you want to ask them, please fill out the cards at your table and hand it to Rebecca Malik as she comes by, or bring the card up here to the podium and I will take it. Please enjoy your lunch and we'll see you a little bit later. Thank you. Very good. Hang on, let me go. The Civic Association's William J. Bill Brooks Community Service Award is named for a much-loved Civic Association director who was devoted to the town of Palm Beach. Bill Brooks was highly respected. He was a highly respected community leader who served on the town council from 2000 to 2008. He died 3.5 years ago, and all of us still miss him very much. Bill's wife, Muffy, is here with me today. The Bill Brooks Community Service Award is presented to someone who has significantly improved the quality of life in Palm Beach. Our recipient this year couldn't be better qualified. Kirk Bluen joined the Palm Beach Police Department in 1989. He became police chief in 2009 and public safety director, supervising both the police and the fire rescue in 2011. During his tenure, Director Bluen has faced difficult challenges: budget cuts, pension reform, union unrest, and sensitive employee relations. Through it all, he's shown exceptional leadership. Town manager Peter Elwell puts it this way, quote, "During our aggressive restructuring of the town's budget, and starting from 2009 to 2012, Kirk Bluen brought a refreshing, professional, and public-spirited approach to this difficult task. First as police chief and later as public safety director, he pursued the business-like goal of reducing cost as much as possible without compromising the department's preparedness or the community's security. Director Bluen cut the police department budget of $15.4 million by 20% to $12.2 million this year. Police employees were reduced from 132 to 104. He cut the fire rescue budget by 23% from $14.3 million to $11 million, reducing employees from 80 to 73. The pension reform measures saved taxpayers $6.6 million this year, and the annual savings will rise to $10.2 million by 2020, as the town's council didn't need to raise any property taxes as a result. Through this all, Kirk never compromised quality service or public safety. In 2012, there were no murders in Palm Beach and only one robbery. Across the bridge in West Palm Beach, unfortunately, West Palm Beach experienced 14 murders and 235 robberies. Crime rates in Lake Worth and Riviera Beach were even higher. Town manager Ewell says, "It is important to note that as Kirk and his management team were achieving greater efficiency, they were also identifying and implementing projects and policies that were enhancing public safety. The security camera initiative in the police department and a concentrated effort to reduce fire rescue response times stand out as two of the many ways in which an innovative spirit has ensured that reducing cost does not reduce public safety." As you can see, our public safety director is an exceptional man, and we're very fortunate to have him with us. Today, the Palm Beach Civic Association is proud to present the 2013 Bill Brooks Award for Community Service to our outstanding public safety director, Kirk Bluen. Kirk, please come forward.
I'm humbled and very grateful to you all for this honor, and very proud to serve as your Director of Public Safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kirk. Our guests of honor today are Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, host and co-hosts of MSNBC's Morning Joe, a program Time magazine called Revolutionary and the New York Times ranked as the top news program in 2008. Joe, a former Florida Joe, a former Florida congressman, was named to the prestigious Time 100 list of the world's most influential people in 2008. In describing why he was selected, New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg said, quote, "Joe speaks his mind without fear of favor. He puts his country before his party. That independence makes him a valuable voice in American politics, and it's what makes Morning Joe such a successful show." Unquote. Morning Joe features interviews with top newsmakers and in-depth analysis of the day's stories. The unique broadcast has been called, quote, the thinking viewer's choice, unquote, by USA Weekend, and called an important wake-up call for political and media leaders by the Associated Press. Previously, Joe hosted Scarborough Country on MSNBC, a primetime news show the San Francisco Chronicle called must-see TV. In addition to his career in television, Joe is also an author of the New York Times bestseller, The Last Best Hope, Restoring Conservatism and America's Promise. His 2004 book, Rome Wasn't Burnt in a Day, predicted the collapse of the Republican majority and the U.S. economy. Joe is a graduate of the University of Alabama and a graduate of the University of Florida School of Law, and a proud former resident of Pensacola, Florida, one of my favorite places. Prior to his career in television, Joe was the publisher and editor of the award-winning newspaper, The Florida Sun. Joe served as a member of Congress from 1994 to 2001. While in office, he was a member of the Judiciary, Armed Services, Oversight, and National Security Committees. He was part of a small group of young Republicans who, the National Journal said, possessed a surprising amount of power given their youth and lack of years in Congress. Mika Brzezinski is the co-host of MSNBC's Morning Joe and also a best-selling author. Her memoir, All Things at Once, became a New York Times bestseller in January 2010. And her second book, Knowing Your Value, which examines the roles of women in the workplace, reached #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list for business books in the spring of 2011. She also writes Getting What You Want, a column for Cosmopolitan. It's a monthly column about career, confidence, and empowerment. Mika also had many years, she's a graduate of Williams College, and she had many years in broadcasting, in local anchoring and reporting before she went to CBS, and that was before she came to MSNBC. And at CBS, she was an anchor of the CBS Evening News Weekend Edition and a CBS News correspondent who frequently contributed to CBS Sunday Morning and 60 Minutes. She reported live from Lower Manhattan for CBS during the September 11th attacks. Mika's father is very, very well known as one of the most well-known foreign policy experts and former national security advisors. And Mika herself is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. She lives in New York with her husband and 2 daughters. Will Joe and Mika, when they finish speaking, they'll take your questions, fill out your cards, give them to myself or give them to Rebecca. And please now join me in welcoming Joe and Mika.
Thank you guys so much for having us. Bob and Suzanne, thank you. Somebody asked me coming in whether Bob used to be my boss. I said, no, Bob is still my boss. Why do you think I'm here? Why do you think I'm here? Somebody said, oh, it must be great being here. This is great promotion, goodwill tour. No, we don't. We really don't need that. We wake up at 4 a.m. every morning. And so Bob called and said, get down here. And so we came down here. Of course, it helps that it's 20 and snowing in Connecticut. So we love being here. Thank you guys so much for having us. And should we ask?
We want to thank the Kesslers as well, Howard and Michelle, for being our hosts yesterday as well.
Thank you guys so much.
Incredible, really. So we did something last night that we'll do again here because
Do you think
Joe
they'll
likes,
answer?
Well, I don't know, but Joe likes to launch into conversations, just blah.
Blah.
He just blurts forward. I like to kind of know the audience a little bit to get a sense of the room. So if we could be fully transparent, first of all, how many of you have seen Morning Joe? Oh, God.
Ah, thank God.
This is not Dallas.
This is not Dallas. That
Dallas
was ugly.
horrible. Nobody
Holy
raised
cow.
their hand. It was 1,500 people. Nobody. Crickets. And I started to sweat. It was the worst speech ever
Wow.
we've ever done.
That was ugly.
Okay, well, that helps. Okay.
Yeah.
To be transparent, how many Republicans are in the room? Oh, wow.
This is the most
thought I
Republicans
had
that I've
hives.
had in a room with me since I went to MSNBC. That's
okay.
good.
It's
very
how many
good.
Democrats? Come on now, raise your hands. Thank God.
There we go. There
Okay.
we go.
Independents?
Wow.
Well, this is our audience.
This is our audience.
And we learned last night, you can say not enrolled. Any not enrolled? Unenrolled. Okay, she is.
That was like me in law school my second and third year.
Okay.
Unenrolled.
All right.
Well, so this is a lot like our audience, as we were saying last night. As you know, I think what makes our show work is the fact that Mika and I come from different backgrounds, have different worldviews, and we invite all different views to our table. And I think that's in part because we're so different ourselves.
Very.
As Bob Wright said, Dr. Brzezinski is her father. He ran U.S. foreign policy for 4 years. My dad ran Dixie Youth baseball teams for 4 years.
Nice.
George.
He's great.
I am a conservative, a Republican from the South. Mm-hmm. Mika is a liberal Democrat from the North. I was raised in Southern Baptist churches
Nice.
across the Deep South. Mika
Catholic.
was raised in a variety of young Marxist League meetings
Stop
across the
it.
greater Manhattan area. So, variety
You love that one.
really is the spice of life. And it is different, but we have a few things in common.
His point is we don't agree, but we do have one fundamental thing in common, and we learned this early on as the show was just beginning 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And that is that our parents are really mean people.
They're awful.
Crazy.
They're just
torturous.
mean.
Yeah.
And why don't we just start with Dr. Brzezinski?
Yep. And I warned
He's
you.
not
I
a
told
nice
you.
man.
I
You know-
told Joe, don't you dare have him on the show.
So
Don't do
I
it.
decide we're starting Morning Joe, and doesn't it make sense to have Dr. Brzezinski on? Because after all, ran U.S. foreign policy. He always has an opinion.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'd be better off to have a few less opinions, or at least keep them inside his head, kind of like me. But I thought he'd be a great guest, so I said, let's get your dad on the show. It'll be great. Mika said,
Don't you dare.
don't do that. I said, why not? Because you just don't want it. You just don't want Dad on the show. I said, come on. I figured I could handle him. I'm a Southern politician, you know us. I feel your pain. I mean, we can handle anything. So we get him on the show, and I don't know what I was thinking about that day, Mika. But for some reason on that day, I decided that I was going to lecture the architect of the Camp David Accords on Middle East peace. And I went on for about 5 minutes. I was very impressed with myself. Mark Foley can tell you I've been impressed with my ability to talk since I was in Congress, right, Mark? And so at the end of 5 minutes, Dr. Brzezinski looks at me, and he says, and I'm thinking he's going to compliment me, he goes, you know, you were stunningly superficial.
And I actually was relieved because it could have been much worse. I tried to explain to Joe that that was actually Brzezinski-style affection. That was him saying, you're in.
You know, I don't need affection that badly. I don't.
Well,
that was
I warned you.
It's on TV, and I found out that it was the family, actually. That's just the way the Brzezinskis are. I met Ian Brzezinski, who worked for Donald Rumsfeld.
He's my Republican brother.
The black sheep of the
A
family.
neocon.
They don't talk to him. He is such a
Seriously.
neocon.
Oh.
Give this guy a couple of tanks, he would invade Canada,
He would.
George. I swear
Sorry,
to
George.
God.
He would take it.
He would take Canada. He would take your McDonald's. He would take the Shell.
Yeah.
Well, it's ugly. He is a right-wing
He drives a
neocon.
tank.
So I met him at Tim Russert's house in 2007, Christmas, at a Christmas party right after the show launched. And I said, your sister is so great. She's so intuitive. She's one of the smartest people I've ever met. And Ian said without blinking, you do know she had the lowest SAT score in the history of Williams College.
And I did. He
It's
was
like
just
they're all SOBs.
conversation.
And then I met 6 months later Mika's mom, this #1 bestseller book, All
a
Things
sculptor.
at Once. She's a sculptor. She's this crazy Czechoslovakian artist.
She's amazing.
And so we have the final book event. It's in Washington. I invite Mrs. Brzezinski because the book is dedicated to Mika's mom.
I wish you hadn't done that.
I invite her up. I said, here's a microphone, Ms. Brzezinski. Tell us something about Mika that nobody in here knows. Mika starts shaking. Her mother grabs the microphone, and she goes, let me think. You know, Mika had the lowest SAT score in the history of Williams College. They are mean people.
Yes, they
But
are.
there's some positive sides.
Look, it's a tough family. It was a tough crowd. My other brother, Mark, is a Democrat. He actually works for President Obama. And
Ambassador to Sweden.
He's the ambassador to Sweden.
That's great.
And we have very diverse points of views.
Right.
And we were brought up to fight over the dinner table over everything. And my father liked to incite these fights. And it's a very critical family. And it made me prepared for exactly where I sit every morning on the set of Morning Joe.
Exactly.
I'm good.
Exactly. But you also had, though, and I loved the story you told when you were on David Letterman about having Deng Xiaoping for dinner, and David Letterman said that must have tasted great. But talk about the night, and this was 1978, when China and America's relations were normalized. It actually happened in the Brzezinski household. How did that work out?
My father was the architect of that, and one of his ideas was to have Deng Xiaoping for dinner at our house as opposed to a state dinner at the White House. So, stop. And so we had issues, though, when we had people over, because my parents were like the Beverly Hillbillies moved to Washington. They're Eastern European immigrants, and they moved to Washington, planted their own crops, hunted for their own wild game, and had chickens.
This was in
with
McLean,
eggs.
Virginia, by the way.
In McLean, Virginia, didn't let anything change them at all. And one of the things we did was host these parties, and we did all the cooking and the preparing ourselves. So when Deng Xiaoping came for dinner, we were all very nervous. At this point, the fire had been set, but my father didn't open the flue and the house got full of smoke. My mother opened the champagne and hit my dad in the eye. And everyone was fighting. And so we were like frayed, the kids taking coats and passing out drinks, and we felt like little prisoners. And I tripped and I fell, and the caviar went right on Deng Xiaoping's crotch. And then at 12 years old, I nervously was wiping it off, and it just went from bad to worse because Deng Xiaoping...
It was a low point in U.S.-Sino relations other than Tiananmen Square.
He was sitting next to Cyrus Vance and the Secretary of State at the time, and I truly think that the problems between my dad and Cy Vance started then. I really do. He looked horrified.
Also, we had to have one more story, and then we need to move on.
Yeah.
You talk about really quickly the night that your mother fed roadkill to Pamela Harriman.
You want to do that one? Okay.
Seriously. This will explain
Are
everything,
you sure?
and then we can move on.
Okay, so we, like I said, hunted our wild game, and often my mother, she's this brilliant sculptor. She does these huge pieces, like this room would be good for one of her pieces. She works with a chainsaw and an axe. She still does today, so do not get her mad when she's holding the axe. And she works with wood, and there's always sawdust all over her. And when my dad was in the White House, she was just absolutely committed to keeping her art career alive, even though she would rush off to the White House and do state dinners and be by his side. So she'd be juggling a chainsaw, 3 kids, and being a White House wife. And sometimes I'd come home, and there would be a chainsaw going in the back and a dead deer hanging from the tree. And I'd honestly worry about bringing friends home because she would gut the deer and drag it into the house. My brothers and my father would kill them. And one day, I was being picked up at school, and my mother was in her trademark, like, army airline suit. It was an art suit that she wore that I think a pilot wore. And usually it was covered with sawdust and plaster or something she was working with. But this day it was covered with blood and sawdust and plaster. And I thought, oh gosh, something got gutted. That's too bad. I get in the car and I feel like we're not alone. And I look in the back, and I hope Bob and Suzanne aren't regretting having us here today. I look in the back and I see a hoof. And I'm like, Mom, is there a deer in the car? Because it's the middle of the week. We usually get them on the weekend. And she's like, oh, yes, I found it on the side of the road. It was still warm. Don't worry, it's fresh. And the best, and I'm thinking here, this doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to just let it go because it's my mom. And I'm thinking to myself that, and she says, and the best news is, I split it with a farmer, and I got the best part. So think about this. McLean, Virginia, Old Dominion Road, where is there a farmer? And who has the tools to cut this thing in half? My mom in her pickup truck. So we're getting closer to home, and she goes, and the best news is I don't have to worry about Thursday night. Cut to Thursday night, and the kids are taking coats and passing out cocktails, and hopefully we're not getting in some stressed out fight before the party. Pamela Harriman comes in, senators come in, ambassadors come in. We're serving on the right, on the left, and I'm serving venison, and people are devouring it. They're loving it. And they're like, Mrs. Brzezinski, this is a fantastic meal. Who is your caterer? And yeah, I freeze because I know she's going to tell the truth. I know she's going to tell the truth. And without missing a beat, she goes, oh, I don't use a caterer. I found this on the side of the road. And the entire room freezes. I stop. I'm thinking, I'm holding the venison, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is one of those moments where the disconnect between my mother and the rest of the world is plainly clear to me. Like nobody gets her, and she doesn't get that they don't get her. And everybody freezes. Pamela Harriman literally spits it out. The whole episode was in the style section of the Washington Post. And to this day, even though I've written about this, my mother has absolutely no idea what was wrong with that. And I love her for it. No doubt about it. Now listen, we have crazy parents. You think mine are crazy? I met Joe's, and they actually rival mine. And your first foray into politics is the perfect example.
Yeah, it was 94 when Mark and I were running, and it was a crazy time in 94. And I remember telling my parents I was going to run for Congress. I was 29. I had no money, no name ID. Nobody knew who I was. But I wanted to go to Washington because I couldn't stand Bill Clinton. He drove me crazy. You know, like he'd be like, I feel your pain on TV. And I'd be like, he's lying. You know he's lying. And so I went to tell my parents that I was going to run against Earl Hutto, who was a 16-year incumbent and the chairman of the Military Construction Committee. And up in Northwest Florida, we basically have beaches and military districts, and that's it. He's unbeatable, right? I mean, this is L.A., Lower Alabama, the Redneck Riviera. They had not sent a Republican to Washington since 1872. And they hung the last one they sent up there. So I had no chance. But I thought my parents would be excited because my parents were so conservative. They still think Richard Nixon was framed. So I tell my dad, Dad, I'm going to Washington. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to run against Earl Hutto. My dad said, that's great, Joey, but I'm voting for Earl. I turned to my mom like, Ma, help me. She's crying. She said, I'll vote for you. And so I was an optimist. I figured running against a 16-year incumbent, no money, no name ID, never been in politics, didn't know anybody in politics. And in the first household I campaigned in, I split it right down the middle, 50-50. It was great. I won, got 62% of the vote, because I learned that year what Mark learned that year. You didn't need your dad's vote to win. You just needed a picture of your opponent with Bill Clinton. And I had it. That's the good news. The bad news is, after you win, you go to Washington, and what's the first thing you got to do? Meet the president. It's like, I'm not going to do it. I hate that guy. But there I was going into the East Room, and I'm turning around, and I'm so angry, and I can't believe I'm here. Can't believe I'm here. And I stop and look, and there he is, Bill Clinton in the flesh. Now, I know a lot of you have met Bill Clinton. I know this because I usually ask the question, how many people have met Bill Clinton? Now, you ask that of most presidents, you get one or two people raising their hands. Bill Clinton gets around. A lot of people have met this guy. And so the first time you meet him, he looks like he's 8'2". He looks like he's Mutombo, the guy in the Geico commercials. It's knocking everything down. And I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me. And he says, hey, it's Joe Scarborough. I turn around, turn to my wife, and I go, he knows my name. The president knows my name. And he comes over and he starts shaking my hand. He said, I sure would love to go to Pensacola sometime again soon. I'm like, would you? And he's doing the full Clinton. His hands are all over me. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. It's just all over you. And I was seduced, friends. I was seduced. Monica had nothing on me. I was just... It's like, come over here, baby. And we were hugging like old friends. The photographer starts taking pictures of me. I was like, oh, sweet Jesus. I pull away. I knew I had ruined my political career that first night. And I go home, and I'm washing my hands furiously like Lady Macbeth. But the stain doesn't come out. You know, I actually disliked the guy so much I felt guilty about it. I saw Erskine Bowles on the Hill one day, who was then the president's chief of staff. He's a real good friend of ours. I said, Erskine, I got to admit, man, I love you, but I can't stand your boss. And Erskine said, don't worry about it, Congressman. He hates you too. And he did. And Hillary did.
Oh, now, and you should see them today, and we'll wrap there with that message, because you should see them today. Joe and Bill, oh, I love you, Joe. I love you, Mr. President.
That's
How
just not
great
true.
are you? I'm
Stop
so
that.
great. You're so great. I
There's
can't
some
tell who's
Republicans
greater.
in this
Is
room.
there
Stop.
anyone greater than us? Joe and Bill, they act as if nothing happened between them, and there is a message there.
Well, there is a message. You know, the president didn't like us. We didn't like the president. But guess what? Together, Republicans and Democrats balanced the budget for the first time in a generation. We balanced it 4 years in a row for the first time since the 1920s. Did a lot of really good things. Passed welfare reform. Passed Medicare reform. Extended the life of Medicare by 8 years. Cut taxes. Cut capital gains tax. Cut the death tax. Paid down the Social Security debt. Did a lot of good things. And you know, every time Bill Clinton and I start talking about all the things we did together, we always get an email from David Axelrod, who can't stand it. He's like, excuse me, you did impeach this guy. And the last time that happened, you know, Bill Clinton actually laughed about it and said, exactly. And the fact that we got so much done together, even during a constitutional crisis, shows that Washington can work. That's what we need now more than ever. We really do. We need people who are going to put their country ahead of their political party. We are in trouble as a country. We've got a $16.5 trillion debt. We've got a demographic time bomb. Well, let me ask really quickly, and then we'll go to questions. How many baby boomers do we have here? Raise your hand. Be proud. Raise them up. Raise your hand. You all are the scourge of humanity. In the 60s, you gave us Woodstock. In the 70s, polyester. I see some of you wearing it now. Disco. In the 80s, Wall Street greed. In the 90s, you gave us Bill Clinton. I could stop there. But now you're going to bankrupt us. You know, and we were talking about this last night. When FDR started Social Security, life expectancy was 62, right? 62. You didn't get your check until you turned 65. That's a plan a conservative can even support. You pay in your whole life and you die before you get the check back. Now listen, I went to University of Alabama and I'm not good at math. But then again, we don't have to be because every year we only have to count to number 1. But anyway, Roll Tide. We got some Notre Dame fans here, Bob. And some imaginary girlfriends with it. But anyway. You get it? Anti-Teo? All right. But in the 1950s, we had 15 people working for every one person on Social Security. Today, we got 3 people working for every one person on Social Security and Medicare. 10 years from now, 2 people working for every one person on Social Security and Medicare. This is not about ideology. This is about math. And if we have politicians that have the courage to tell the truth to their base, if Republicans have the courage to tell the truth to their rabid base on the far right, and if Democrats have the courage to tell the truth to their math-denying rabid base on the far left, then we can fix this country. You know, we've got them outnumbered. We really do. Everywhere Mika and I go, we hear the same thing. Americans want their leaders to work together. I think it's time we start demanding more of our politicians in Washington. So thank you guys so much. Bob's here with questions, and he's got a lot of them. So you ready to answer?
Sure. Okay, we'll start with some easy questions here.
Good.
I think Mika, in view of the roadkill comment, this may be yours. What's the world's best vodka?
Wow. I don't know. I tend to dabble in a lot of different vodkas. There's a good Polish vodka that my dad brings to the table every Christmas, but I like Grey Goose, actually.
Okay.
And believe it or not, Donald Trump makes a great vodka. Try it.
Okay.
Really?
He does. It's really good. Trump vodka.
Now, yeah, and by the way, Donald is so shy, you would never hear that from him.
He actually said it's the greatest vodka in the world.
Mika, try this vodka.
I tried
it's
it.
the greatest
It was really
vodka ever.
Good.
So.
All right. This is for you, Joe. You gotta be careful on your answer here. Okay. Do you think Liverpool can make it into the Champions League spots following their 3-2 win over the Spurs yesterday?
It was very exciting. Who's the one soccer fan here? Who asked that? Good for you. Good for you. Good for you. It was a comeback. It was quite a comeback. Yeah, people have a hard time figuring out why a guy from the Redneck Riviera loves English Premier Soccer so much, but I have adopted Liverpool. The answer is no, but here's hoping.
All right, here's one here. This is a resolution of an on-air viewpoint. Joe, why do you pick on Lewis? Because you love him like a brother, or you're trying to make him pay his dues?
Come here, Lewis.
Look at Lewis.
Come here,
Look
pretty
at
boy.
Lewis. And
Come here.
Lewis, don't talk. Please.
Don't talk.
It always makes things worse.
It's just better that way, Lewis. So, okay, I want everybody, why do we pick on Lewis? Okay, look at this guy.
Look at him.
Okay, look at him. Here.
Why
come
wouldn't
here,
we?
There. There you go. No. Here, look over there. Over here. Show him profile there. Look how pretty he is. This guy has a delicate bone structure of a bird. Now, what we do is we pick on Lewis so much because we've told him he is so beautiful as a man. If we don't, everybody will hate him. Right? You remember that old commercial? Don't hate me because I'm beautiful?
That's Lewis.
We've taken that one off the list. There's still
Yes.
about 15 other excuses for Lewis, but what have we shown you, Lewis?
Oh,
The world. You've shown me the world.
don't talk, Lewis. Don't
No.
talk.
So what we've shown Lewis is everybody feels sorry for him because we pick on him so much. Don't you feel sorry for this guy?
Aww.
He's beautiful, though. All right, you can sit down now.
Lewis is his producer.
Lewis is our producer,
really
and
talented.
he started doing way too early at 5:30, from 5:45 actually to 6 o'clock, and he's telling us we're very lucky to have him there because he gives us the Bergdorf bounce before the show starts
I think
at
he
6
called it the
o'clock.
bump, but
So,
whatever.
yeah, his mom watches, and that's about it.
Okay.
Okay, here's a more serious question for either of you or both of you. Shouldn't President Obama have foreseen the mayhem existing in the Middle East, basically when he went into Tunisia and Gaddafi and Egypt, and considering there were no real government institutions in those countries that could be relied on?
Well,
Not true for Egypt.
I just don't know that the president had a lot of different options. I think we were all sitting and watching what happened in Tunisia, and when somebody with a push cart can be abused by the government and start a revolution across the region, it's hard to second guess what this president or what any president would do. I will tell you that in Egypt, when the Arab Spring really took off in Egypt, we had a lot of ambassadors from the Middle East warning us that we didn't want to throw Mubarak away. And if we did that, we would be sending the wrong message to Saudi Arabia, and we'd be sending the wrong message to a lot of our allies there. But again, I think the greater danger is the United States of America continuing to try to micromanage everything that takes place in the Middle East and across the world. We have found that a lot of times, we've all heard the road to hell is paved with good intentions. We've spent the past 10 years paying for active involvement in the Middle East. Not only in Iraq, but we're in an endless war in Afghanistan that's costing us $2 billion a week. And we've got to start reinvesting in this country and stop trying to rebuild every other country across the globe.
What are the chances of any meaningful campaign reform?
Campaign finance reform?
Yeah.
Not good. I really think right now the real battle is taken up in the Supreme Court and the Roberts Court. And I think they have a more laissez-faire approach to it. So I think any legislation that would be passed in Congress might be overturned by the Roberts Court.
It is a difficult one. Here's a more cynical one. Since Congress can't agree on approving judges, what makes you think that they could actually legislate meaningful legislation?
That's their job, right? They don't do it very well. But we were talking about this last night, Mika, and I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
I mean, why don't you give your take? Are you optimistic that we're going to get a deal done between the Republicans and
I think
the president?
You talked pretty well about the learning curve that he has, basically had to endure over time. And it would be such a failure of leadership on his part, quite frankly, if they can't get to a grand bargain or something, if they can't get anything done. And I think both sides are at the point where they have to. But it has been, and I think there is a risk that we may have to turn over a lot of people. I don't think it's just the president who hasn't led here. I think there's been a lot of people who have put the wrong things first.
Well, you're a supporter of the president. How do you think, could you talk about how you think the president has done over the first 4 years dealing with Congress and getting acclimated to the ways of Washington?
Talked a little bit about this last night, but getting to know him, but also getting to know his inner circle really well, and having actually been in the Oval Office or in some of their offices during some of the crises that this president dealt with, including the Gulf spill, which was handled terribly by the White House. we really got a sense, a front row seat into how they think as a group, and possibly even into how he thinks. I think he spent a lot of time trying to convince people like Speaker Boehner or Mitch McConnell or whoever that he's right about something, as opposed to negotiating a deal. And it's funny, you know, on the show you would talk about over the years people in the White House not having enough experience running things, not having enough experience running a business. And I was a little reticent to not fight back on that because I really believed in him and still do. Having said that, I have learned the power of negotiating well. And negotiating well does not mean telling the other side you're right. It means getting something out of the conversation and giving something and walking away, winning.
That was one of the things that Bill Clinton, when he came to Washington, he was ready to deal. Ronald Reagan, when he came to Washington, was ready to deal. They were governors. They came from states where they had to deal with the other party. I mean, Bill Clinton was a Democrat in Arkansas. It's not an easy thing to do. You've got some very conservative people there, but he figured out how to make it work. So when he came to Washington and he saw Republicans coming after him, wanting to destroy him politically, he didn't take this as an existential threat. He just said, this is politics. I've got to outsmart him. I've got to deal with him. That's the amazing thing about Bill Clinton. You could strike out against him in the morning, and in the afternoon, he'd be calling you up, want to go play golf? I practiced in a trial law firm in Northwest Florida and had all these pictures from Bill Clinton with great appreciation, and it drove my Democratic partners crazy. Why is he thanking you? You impeached him. And I said, that was the amazing thing about Bill Clinton. There's something that the president and I were talking about. Was it here? The golf thing here? About a month ago, I think. The PGA, Phil Mickelson had an event for, what's that? Birdies for the Brave. And we were talking about a month ago. And what President Clinton said then is, great politicians have short memories.
Just like men.
Just like men. Exactly. We're distracted. So, the most important thing about that is the fact that if you're Barack Obama, you can't worry about what happened 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, or 6 months ago. Or yesterday. Every day is a new day. Every day is an opportunity to make a deal. Again, George was talking about, by the way, he gave us, what a generous guy, George.
Thank you.
He gave Mika and me free gift certificates for any time we went to a McDonald's in Russia. Really, George?
I got one for Canada, too.
Really?
I have a Canada one.
Really? You know what George did? And this is an important story.
I think those are
You were
dated, too.
so cheap. Seriously.
You're like my dad.
You are like Dr. Brzezinski. George started talking seriously to the Soviets in 1976. In 1976, the height of the Cold War. And he kept talking to them. And he kept talking to them. And you know what? Getting to know the communist leaders. Getting to know the people over there. Building personal relationships. It works. I remember evangelicals being angry at Billy Graham because Billy Graham went to Russia, not to sell hamburgers, but to sell Jesus. But Billy Graham went there because you know what? He knew that if he was going to get his message, the hundreds of millions of people behind the Iron Curtain, he couldn't do that from Charlotte, North Carolina. Our politicians in Washington, D.C. have got to figure out how to make the deal, and that starts with building personal relationships. Now, let me tell you something. Ideologues on the far right don't like it when I say this, and ideologues on the far left don't like it. But I always challenge them. I said, do me a favor, because you want your politicians to hate people on the other side. Do me a favor. When you go to work tomorrow, I want you to start picking fights with people that are in the cubicle over from you. And go yell at your manager. And start a little civil war. See what your business gets done. I mean, we don't do that in business. Bob didn't do that in business. I didn't do that as an attorney. I didn't do that in Congress. You haven't done that in media. You've got to build personal relationships. And yesterday on Meet the Press, maybe I shouldn't have said it, but David Gregory said, why do you think we're going to get a deal? My answer was because I think the president's been in Washington long enough to figure it out. And I'm not saying this as a Republican, because I will be the first to tell you, if the Democratic Party had been smart enough to nominate Hillary Clinton, she would have won, and she would have been ready to work with everybody from day one. The president, it took about 4 years. Let's hope the next 4 are better.
One more.
Apropos of the comments about short-term memory, this question relates to what are the likelihood of having term limits, which would additionally save lots of money in pensions and lifetime benefits.
Yeah. You know, I'm always asked.
It could go to other purposes.
I'm always asked, what's the one thing we could pass that would make a difference? Term limits. There's no doubt about it. Term limits. Mark and I went up to Washington, and so many of us had agreed to self-imposed term limits. And I'll tell you what, we fought the good fight. When we went up there, people forget this, but when we went up in 1994, everybody said the budget could not be balanced. It did. We balanced the budget. And again, we balanced it 4 years in a row because there were enough people up there that weren't afraid to not only take on the president of the other party, but like Mark and myself, take on the speaker in our own party. Even when Newt Gingrich was seen as the most powerful man in town, people like Mark and myself and other Republicans, when Newt went out of line, we went up and we would, we would take him on and we would challenge him because we weren't worried about being speaker 30 years from now or being chairman 20 years from now. We were worried about going up to Washington, doing our job, and coming back home. I don't think there's anything that's more important, personally, to reforming Congress than passing term limits and having citizen legislators instead of having people up there because it's the only job they can keep.
Okay. As this will be your last. This is since you are often critical of Republicans. Do you think the Republican Party can be saved, and what will it look like?
I think, I think there's such a huge disconnect between Washington Republicans and Republicans across the rest of the country. And we hear it when we go out there, but look at Chris Christie. It's hard not to. He's a big guy. But look at Chris Christie. Hard to miss him, right? The guy has a 74% approval rating in New Jersey. A blue state Republicans haven't won since 1988. He's the first pro-life governor there since Roe v. Wade was passed in 1973. Think about that. And yet, a lot of talk radio hosts hate him. Glenn Beck went on Bill O'Reilly a couple of weeks ago and he said, I don't like Chris Christie. Of course you don't like Chris Christie. He's popular. You've been working your whole life, Glenn Beck, to drive women from the Republican Party. It has to drive you crazy that Chris Christie has a plus 20 gender gap with women, except they're on his side. In a state that has 14% more Democrats than Republicans. And what's Chris Christie done? He's taken on entrenched interests. He's taken on the teachers union up there, which is one of the toughest. He's passed real reform. He's taken on the public unions. This guy has done in New Jersey what Republicans need to do in Washington, D.C., and he's been rewarded for it with a 74% approval rating. I think if you look at what Republicans are doing outside of Washington, D.C., instead of what Republicans have been doing inside of Washington, D.C., since they've been trapped in this, it's just this bubble. I mean, it's unbelievable. This echo chamber that's fueled by, I think, a lot of right-wing talk. But get out into the country where Republicans are running state houses and they're running governorships, and we still run 60% of the governorships. We still have a majority of state senators across the country. We still have a majority of the state legislatures across the country. Look what Republicans are doing when they're outside the echo chamber. And they have to strike deals with Democrats. And they don't have to worry about what people like Glenn Beck or bloggers say about them day in and day out. Well, I think that's a great roadmap for the Republican Party.
And Second Amendment, and the attack weapons.
What's that?
Second Amendment and firearm restrictions.
Oh, guns. You know, I had 100%. I had 100% rating with the NRA. I didn't, have a stockpile of guns at home, but I believe that the Second Amendment meant that Americans had a right to keep and bear arms. But if you look at the position the NRA is taking right now and are forcing a lot of Republicans to take right now, it's indefensible. They're fighting universal background checks. It keeps guns out of the hands of felons. They're fighting gun trafficking laws. And it just makes absolutely no sense to me. You have, first of all, with universal background checks, 92% of Americans support universal background checks. 92%. Do we really want to be on the side of the 7%? Is the survivalist wing of the NRA really that important to us? When the majority of NRA members support universal background checks, when the majority of NRA members support tough gun trafficking laws? And seriously, I'm sorry. Who needs assault weapons?
Joe, will you run again?
Who needs assault weapons? I'm on a roll here, Bob. Why do you need assault weapons? And let me tell you something. The next time somebody comes up to you and tells you that the Second Amendment gives them the right to possess assault weapons, tell them to go back and read the Constitution. Tell them to go back and actually read Scalia's opinion that the conservative court wrote in 2008. You've got a right to keep and bear arms, to protect your family, to have a handgun in your house, to have a hunting rifle, to have a shotgun. You have that constitutionally protected right. You do not have a right to possess the Bushmaster, the AR-15, the type of assault weapons that were used in Newtown, that continue to be used in mass slayings across this country. You don't have that constitutional right. Do not insult me. Do not insult my intelligence by suggesting that you love the Constitution more than me just because you don't know what the Constitution says. It is angering me because we have these small factions in the Republican Party that's driving us over the cliff. I would like somebody to tell Rick Santorum that when he runs for president next time, not to talk about contraception. It was decided in 1965. And when you have my wife and her friends who have never voted Democratic in their life for any campaign, when they start hearing Rick Santorum and other people talking about contraception, and they start saying, you know what, I may not be able to vote for the Republican Party this year, you know we're in trouble. We have got to tell the extremists, if they want to start their own party, that's fine. But we want our Republican Party back.
Will you run for office again?
No.
Thank you very much for being here.
Maybe.
You two were really generous with your time and your efforts. And Mika, thank you very much. And Joe, we'd like to give you a little book you can read on the way back.
I love it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob.
Yep.
And
It's the history of the Bushmaster.
Oh, the history of the Bushmaster. Thank you guys so much, and thank you for what you do and for being here to support this important organization. And I've got a question for you. How did you let that one robbery slip through your hands? Thank you. Thank you, Bob.